Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here, and welcome. Welcome to Final Throws, late stage capitalism. Here we are, 21st century style, the end of an era, if you will. Enormous corporate greed. Marry that with incompetent and, compromised government. You throw in a little bit of, neglected rural communities, and what do we got? Well, I look at the corporate greed that we're seeing. In 2022, Norfolk Southern pocketed $4.8 billion in profit and used a lot of it for stock buybacks. We've got a cash compromised government. You got officials who said, nothing over the week and a half before, they figured out that, hey, we could use this to get the other side. Let's not forget the unions that have been crushed and handicapped by 40 years of supply-side voodoo Reaganomic economic policy and theory that said, go on, corporate America, go get those workers. And, of course, let's not forget the neglected small towns who are helpless to stand up to either. Welcome to where we are, America. And, I looked at this, and there's some things on the social medias that ask good questions. When Republicans figured out they could attack Pete Buttigieg, this is when this got attention. Stop and think about how it sparked. We were talking about this last week. This week, it sparked some attention. Oh, my goodness. Pete Buttigieg didn't say anything. Well, neither did the congressman in that district either. And you would think the guy who's, those are his people. Those are the people that he's supposed to represent, Republican Bill Johnson. You would think he'd have put out a statement. It's something nice and mealy-mouthed and soft about, I care about my people. Didn't even do that until he was scheduled to go on the F channel to talk about how Biden and Buttigieg are doing nothing. And look, I got my problems with Biden and Buttigieg on this issue because there's a lot of blame to go around. But I find it interesting that it only came to light. It only came to the front of the media structure when Republicans go, hey, this is a way to go beat up on those Democrats. And then people start going, well, what about the working people? Now, here's the thing. This is the weird part of this. This should be nonpartisan, completely nonpartisan. The person we should know his name is not Buttigieg or Biden or any of the idiots on the right who have made this an issue to attack Biden and Buttigieg. We should know the name of Alan Shaw. You go, well, who's Alan Shaw? Thank you, mainstream media, for not pointing out that he's the CEO of Norfolk Southern. Huge salary, lives in an 8,000 square foot mansion. Was supposed to show up and address the good people of East Palestine, address their concerns, keep them up to date what's going on. And do you think he showed up? No, didn't show up. We surprised? No, not surprised at all. And the thing is why don't we know the names of these CEOs who do these things? I had to look him up. I didn't know who he was. Why aren't these the people who are being blamed? Why aren't these the people who are going to jail? The statement that's going around all over the place is hazardous material specialist Sil Cagliano, I guess his name is. He said, we basically nuked a town with chemicals so we could open up the railroad. And that's the reality on a certain level. We allowed them to, one, continue to push and destroy safety regulations, be unsupervised. Because again, we have this bizarre belief that Alan and the board of directors at Norfolk Southern care about those people in East Palestine. If his 8,000 square foot mansion was in East Palestine, I'll guarantee you there'd be some stuff going on. But it's not, because this isn't somebody else's backyard. This isn't poor and working class people's backyards. This isn't in the well-to-do areas where our CEO class in their gated communities. You don't see the train going through their backyard. No. And this, again, is another one of those moments that you look at this whole system, this whole stinking system of massive corporate greed, government officials that are at the behest of these corporate titans, unions that have been hobbled and handicapped and beaten over the decades, and small towns who are incapable of standing up to any of them or doing anything. The fact that Norfolk Southern offered the town of East Palestine 25 grand, 25 grand, as you know, oh, here's something to help you get through this little minor tragedy, this tiny little spill, which equates to about $5 a resident, $5, and did this with a straight face. And again, I keep going back to, remember, Republicans thought this was an opportunity to lay all the responsibility at Biden and Buttigieg's feet without anyone asking the question and going, wait a second, isn't this your ideology? Aren't you and your conservative ideologues responsible for this? Isn't this pro-business run amok? Isn't this globalization and corporatization and deregulation run amok? Isn't that this? Answer, yes. Because we're now getting early reports on what the cause was. And I said from the beginning, there were reports that the train was on fire. It turns out it was reportedly on fire for like 20 miles before, it finally derailed. Turns out, according to the NTSB, their report today that came out said NTSB investigators have identified and examined the rail car that initiated the derailment. Surveillance video from a residence showed what appears to be a wheel bearing in the final stages of overheat failure moments before the derailment. The wheel set, they got it. They know which one it is. They're sending it off to be tested in their labs. The valve that failed, they've got that because they blew up the train. They're going to send that off to be tested. And you know where this is all going to go. And I said from the beginning, eventually they're not going to blame Alan Shaw. They're not going to blame the board of directors. They're not going to blame the railroad industry for their precision scheduled railroading that has gutted tens of thousands of workers, has said screw safety, we don't care. None of that. They're going to lay it at the feet of the workers who were supposed to do those inspections in 90 seconds and look at 120 different things. That's where this is going to go. And you go, when do we wake up? Now, understand, according to the Government Accountability Office, in order for the railroads to save money, what they do, they made trains longer. So you have these bigger, longer trains and add fewer people doing these jobs. So you've got fewer people per car checking this stuff. They point out between 2008 and 2019, train lengths have increased by 25%. So that train that was going out of the station, in 2008 is now a quarter bigger. And you go, well, that's just saving money for the company. Yeah, but they're doing it with far fewer employees. They also point out, according to a report over at USA Today, that regulators have found that hazardous material violations are way up. In fact, 36% more hazmat violations. Because again, as we heard, a couple of days ago from our friend over at the Smart Union, they've gotten rid of the people who were trained and qualified to do these inspections. So you've got, supervisors, you've got people pencil whipping things through. And again, this is predictable. This is what the union workers were screaming about over the summer and for the last couple of years, to be honest. And what the Biden administration dropped the ball on. We wanted to get them the best income. We wanted to get them this, but weren't listening to all the problems. The sick days were a huge problem, but the safety was also a huge problem. And the fact that we didn't listen, the fact that we didn't push for it, and even I said, there's no way Congress, there's no way the president, there's no way they're going to let these guys go on strike. There's just no way. So they've got to get in there and impose things on the rail industry, because the rail industry is not going to ever voluntarily do anything that's going to cost them more money. Inspections cost them money. More personnel costs them money. And they've sat down, they've done the bean counting. They've gone, okay, so let's say we have a little derailment. Yeah, let's say we have, 11 hazardous material cars full of nasty toxic stuff, spill into the water there in East Palestine, Ohio, and head down the river through the state of Ohio to the Mississippi. So let's say that happens. What's it cost us? And they actually figure out they're going to pay the little town $25, $5 a head, 25 grand. Maybe they pay another one, couple of bucks, because they know they can steamroll these little towns. They know they can steamroll elected officials with their massive lobbying arm. So they've made the calculus. So we have one of these. We'll chalk it up to human error. We'll blame one of those workers, and we'll get away with it. And no one's going to come after us. And it's not just, it's just not the rail industry. It's every one of these massive industries that get away with consolidating to the point to where they're even more powerful than the federal government, where they can hold this government hostage. Look, the railroads could hold this country hostage. And they knew that. It wasn't that they couldn't afford sick days. It wasn't that they couldn't afford better safety procedures. It wasn't because they couldn't afford to replace bearings on these. It wasn't that at all. It's because they didn't want to. It's not because they couldn't afford it. Get out of here. They didn't want to. What they wanted is they wanted to live in their 8,000 square foot mansions. They wanted to line their pockets with huge stock buybacks. And again, this comes back down to policy. And this again goes to the heart of the people who are screaming the loudest, my Republican friends and conservative Democrats, who let these companies get away with this. Been talking about this for years, which again is the reason that you need to have strong unions. And you go, well, these workers have a union. Yeah, but only to such a point. Because federal law, if you look at what the Railway Labor Act does, basically neuters their ability to take any direct militant action. This is why, again, we need to have a strong, vibrant labor movement to stand up and fight these things. Seriously, think about this with me. And I've used the analogy of, if you're the only person on the road with a radar gun, are you going to speed? The answer is yeah. These corporations, they don't care about the communities. They don't care about their workers. Yeah, we see flowery language, we see commercials, and yeah, in some rare circumstance where the owner is still on site occasionally, maybe. But these giant multinational corporations, these giant multi-billion-dollar companies, they don't care. All that's just a negative on a balance sheet. It all comes down to how much they can put in the shareholders' pockets, how much they can put into their pockets. So am I surprised that hazmat violations are up? No. Am I surprised that trains are getting bigger? No. Am I surprised that the inspection times are less? No, of course not. Because this is what allowing industry to police itself gets you. When you don't have a strong counterbalance to corporate power. And look, our elected officials, they understand it. They know where the power lies. And it's not with you and me. It's with these big industries and their lobbying arms. And until we start taking that back and make this a nonpartisan issue, and we yell at all sides to ensure that this never happens to anyone, it's going to continue to happen. Not just in rail, but in every industry. Look at the thing that happened with Southwest not too long ago, where they had thousands of people grounded because of their screw up. That everything to do with their mismanagement, their corporate greed. Do we hold them accountable? No. So there's a lot to be angry about. And working people, let's figure out how we get angry about the right stuff. Being angry about this is the right stuff. The poison that we're being pushed by our friends on the right, not so much. But I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is 25 grand for a town enough? $5 a person? Would you take the $5? And they're coming around, they're asking people to, hey, can we come in your house and be free of any liability to make sure your air and your conditions are okay? Would you sign it? Boy, I sure hope not. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
See, this is why I don't find it of any surprise whatsoever that, according to the Associated Press, half of the Americans that they surveyed in a recent poll indicate that they believe national news organizations intentionally mislead, misinform, or persuade the public to adopt a particular point of view through their reporting. This is the foxification of our news media. This is the cable news stuff, because not news. I get people all the time going, well, you know, you think you're a journalist. No, I'm not a journalist. You think you're a news program. No, not a news program. If you're coming here thinking that I'm reporting you the news, you're wrong. This is an opinion program. This is a talk program. I want to hear other people's opinions. I want to hear thoughts. But this isn't news. News, I go to news organizations, real ones, not the F channel, not CNN. I go to real ones. I look at the New York Times, the Washington Post. I even look at the right-wing stuff, the Washington Examiner. I look at news outlets and filter through what they're saying. So am I surprised that half of the country who gets their news from the F channel thinks that their news is biased? No, not a bit. Especially when you look at the reporting on this derailment. Because a handful of Republicans thought, hey, this is a way to go attack Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, it's now become, it's a right-wing thing. And the focus is going to be, attacking, Buttigieg and Biden. I had people early on saying, Biden, he ordered an executive order to make this happen so we would forget about the balloons. And look, I'm sure on some quote-unquote news station, news channel, someone said that as if it were really true. I could just picture it. I can't. Someone in a nice shirt and tie with one of those really great green screen backgrounds that looks really official with the beautiful chyrons and the flashing images and everything, going, breaking news. Inside Edition tells us, or whatever, Joe Biden signs executive order to derail train. Poisons thousands to cover up his vaccines. You can just see this happening. So it's not surprising to me. And since most people get their news from Facebook, which how that happened, it's not surprising that most of it's BS. I mean, what used to be The Onion is now what was once satirical. People are now starting to take serious. I've had people send me satirical articles going, see? I'm going, do you not see at the top of the page it says satire? And the answer is no, sadly, because we're so biased in our thoughts that, the right wants to hate Joe Biden so badly and the left wants to hate Donald Trump so badly that it doesn't matter the source anymore. So am I shocked? No, not at all. Because the real news is bad enough. Corporate America is screwing us at every opportunity. That's the reality. Who unleashed them? I go back to and maybe it's just that I'm a little bit older and I remember talking to older people a lot. But we had an economy that was heavily regulated. We had an economy that ensured that workers were safer, had better opportunities to earn better wages. I was reading a book today that we're going to have a guest on in a little bit. I was reading her book, and she points out that the trucking industry, and I already knew this, but she actually put a number to it. In 1980, when deregulation was signed, a truck driver was making about 110 grand a year in today's dollars. That's down to $47,000 in today's dollars. Over the decade from when deregulation happened, wages for truck drivers dropped by 44%. And again, it's these bad neoliberal policies by both parties, look, conservative Democrats and the Republican establishment, that ram this stuff down our throats. So am I surprised that people are angry and grasping for something that they want to be true? Like Republicans care about working people? I know they're making a heavy pivot. They really are. They're making a heavy pivot, and this is one of those issues saying, oh no, we care. Yet I haven't heard the F channel talk about the people on the train. Because there are only, two or three? I haven't heard anyone say, how come there weren't people on that train to make sure that when that fire started, that they saw it maybe 10 miles into when it started. So that maybe they could have begun this process of slowing down, made the derailment less bad. Who knows? Who knows what could have happened had you had, I don't know, someone there. The fact is we don't have someone there anymore. We've got technology, and at least they tell us. These detection systems that aren't regulated, aren't really even mandated, but the railroads put up the camera or the image just in case. And you wonder why where we are is where we are. And I look at this, am I surprised that half the country doesn't believe what they're being told? No, I'm actually surprised that number's not higher, especially when you look at Twitter. You got Elon Musk, who bought Twitter specifically to destroy what it was, and fired his engineer when his impressions weren't high enough. I mean, really, there's nothing funnier than a egotistical billionaire who feels jilted. I mean, I blocked him on Twitter just because that's not what people are doing. Because I think at some point there has to be some blowback. He's angry that Joe Biden's tweets got more impressions than his did. This is why having gazillionaires owning any monopolistic entity, having that kind of power is bad. My grandparents' generation understood that. And as I was saying, that generation business was heavily regulated to ensure safe conditions, to ensure good wages, to ensure that people were held accountable. And we're in a moment right now where, corporate America knows they can cause catastrophe. They can do horrible things. And we're just going to eat it. Because the cleanup here, there's going to be a big bill that'll be paid. There'll be some money that'll go out. They'll make a huge thing out of it and say, look how much we paid for this. But the long-term costs, we the people are going to end up eating. The externalities of all of the illnesses that are going to happen because of this, all of the suffering that's going to happen because of this, all of the lost wages, all of the broken families, that's not going to be borne by Norfolk Southern. They don't care. They live in their 8,000 square foot mansions. They don't care about you and your 1,500 square foot bungalow. This is where we are. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day the uprising of the 20,000 officially ended in New York City. As many as 30,000 young, predominantly immigrant Jewish women went back to work after a bitter 11-week strike. They faced down their bosses, the police, and the courts. Arrests and fines drained much of the union's funds. Young union leaders like Clara Lemlich had been arrested 17 times and suffered 6 broken ribs. Women garment workers spent most of the winter running to union meetings, handing handing out leaflets, walking picket lines, raising funds, and distributing strike benefits. Many smaller shops settled in workers' favor early on in the strike, but by mid-February, closed shop demands kept many workers on the picket lines. The strike ended with partial but real victories. Garment workers won the 52-hour work week, 4 paid holidays, employer-paid tools and materials, collectively bargained wages, and more. The International Lady Garment Workers Union started the strike with 100 members and had 20,000 by the end. All but 14 of the city's 353 shops signed contracts. But many garment workers continued to face unsafe working conditions like locked doors and flimsy or non-functioning fire escapes. Safety-related demands would not be addressed until after the 60,000-strong cloakmakers strike the following summer. One of the largest factories and worst offenders was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Workers there went back with no agreement. 147 would die a year later in a tragic fire. In the aftermath, basic fire safety principles were finally established and implemented in New York State workplaces. These formed the foundations for many modern-day fire safety practices, like exit signs and doors, better ventilation, and sprinkler systems, fire alarms, and drills.
Please be my Valentine. That is not only a warm, sweet, sometimes romantic sentiment people express in mid-February on frilly red cards. It's also the name of a 3rd century saint who literally lost his head, a 9th century pope whose reign lasted only 40 days, 3 Roman emperors, a very good Mexican hot sauce, and a tiny town in Texas. That town has a genuinely sweet story to tell and a unique role to play in the sending of thousands of Valentine's Day sentiments to people around the world. Valentine, Texas, population 217, was founded by the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s and reportedly was named for one of the corporation's big shareholders. Nothing romantic about that. But in recent years, would-be Cupids have turned the town's name and, believe it or not, its one-room post office into a center of affectionate expression. What happened is that romantics from distant places began to batch up their pre-addressed stamped valentines and zip them to this postal outpost way out on the Texas-Mexico border. Why? Because to give their sentimental missives extra oomph, they wanted them to bear the special touch of being mailed from an actual place named Valentine. The greatest thing about our public postal workers is that they literally deliver, and the Valentine branch goes the extra mile to provide this loving gesture at no extra charge. Ismelda Ornelas, postmaster of the 79854 office, hand stamps each envelope herself. Indeed, the Valentine Post Office is now officially designated the Love Station. Moreover, the local school district holds an annual art contest among students to design each year's Valentine postmark, which is then stamped on each envelope. This is Jim Hightower saying, see, while the media tells us our world is going to hell, here's another grassroots example of loving, creative people going the other way. Happy Valentine's Day.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Marsha Blackburn, senator from Tennessee, tweeted out, I think it was yesterday, that she wants to ban TikTok, I guess it is, which I'm not against. She wants to ban Confucius Institutes, ban CCP-owned farmland in America, bring manufacturing back to the USA, and hold Xi Jinping accountable. And I'm like, I think I wrote that tweet before Twitter existed. I kind of think that this not a bad idea. Maybe we could get some people to come on board. But I got to tell you, I find it amazing that this balloon thing has taken on such insanity. And now, as I said from the beginning, and I do not back up, this was a trial balloon. I don't think they were gathering anything important. It was a trial balloon to see how we would react, and we failed. And here to share some thoughts on the big balloon and, well, what Marsha and the Republicans now who've seen the light. They've seen the light. What are they going to do? That's why I've asked Emily De La Brea to come talk with us. She's the co-founder of Horizon Advisory, horizonadvisory.org, their website. Emily, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to get your thoughts first on this whole balloon thing. I said from the beginning, I'm sure we knew when they were building the damn thing that it was coming this way, and they followed it all the way here, which you're now seeing reports that happened. But it was my initial impression that they're doing this as to throw chum into the water and see us eat each other, and we failed this test. I'm curious your thoughts.
I absolutely agree that the balloon is more significant for the response and what that response indicates about today's attitudes towards China, US-China relations, and fundamental contradictions between the two countries than it is about like what precisely this balloon itself was doing and its security implications. I would add two things to your framing. The first is that the balloon was also just testing, I think, the US resolve to respond. How much Washington and how much the American people were willing to escalate to see this as an actual threat to engage in something closer to conflict. So a trial balloon for sentiment and willingness to act, as well as for anything else. And just the other thing is that I think that this whole balloon incident underscores quite how real the threat of China has become for the American population and the American individual in a way that was not the case. Like, that was not as acute, as tangible, and that didn't lead to the same kind of like real desire for action 2 years ago.
No, I mean, now we're going to have a Senate investigation. John Tester is going to lead up the spy balloons, the balloon gate. Let's call it balloon gate. We're gonna lead into this, and we're going to have hearings, and there's going to be all this stuff. And you go, I remember when we were in the Cold War, during the USSR years, this kind of stuff happened all the time, and the country didn't freak out, and it wasn't used as a thing to pit people against each other. This should be, and I said the first time it came out, this should be something that unites us around the idea of taking on China. This should be the thing that brings us together and go, yeah, we don't want them over our heads, but we also don't want them buying the ground under our feet either.
100% on all of those fronts. And there's this weird disconnect where, on the one hand, incidents like this are great for like waking up the American population and hammering home how much we don't want China not only like over our heads spying, but also showing blatant disrespect for American sovereignty and security. But the answer is not all to obsess about balloons and all to run after the ball and decide that all of the commissions, all the investigations, all the resources have to be allocated towards a Chinese balloon project. Like, the answer is to address China's threat broadly.
Exactly, but here's the thing. I see people complaining about the balloons. They look up. I got to see the balloons. But I don't see people deleting their TikTok accounts if they even can off their phones. And if you read the terms of service and people, I've asked people to try and take it off. They can't get it off. There's no way. They collect every keystroke. They collect all your images. They're collecting so much information and data on us. They don't need the damn balloons. They got the TikTok.
Yeah, like China is a huge threat. China's surveillance and efforts to control the American population are a huge threat. And those are so much more pervasive in our society than any individual balloon story. And I'm torn because this balloon case is amazing for, again, the narrative impact, the rallying call it's provided. And that's partly because it's so absurd as a word, as an idea. It's partly because you could look up and see the balloon if you were in Montana at the right time. The issue is that there has to be that sinew that connects amazing story, dominated the news cycle for 10 days, Balloon Gate, to, okay, here's a real strategic comprehensive action by China that includes the things that, as you said, actually really matter deep down, like TikTok.
See, because here's the thing. It only became a story. And this is the thing with the derailment as well. It only became a story when Republicans thought they could hurt Biden and the administration. That's it. And again, I see a lot of words. I don't see any action. And so there are a lot of tweets. There are a lot of people on the F channel, slamming their fist on the table, wagging their finger, doing all that. But I'm not seeing legislation. Where is fine, let's ban TikTok. Let's do that. Fine, let's go and reclaim some of the corporations and the land and the things. If you're going to go this route, where's the policy? Where's the actions?
I'm going to take what you said and put two slightly more positive twists on it because, as you pointed out, for once I'm not wearing black today. Um, First, I think that there's another reason this became a big story. And I think that's that the American population was involved. That individuals looked up, saw the balloon, filmed it, started telling this story. And that to me suggests that there's another power here, like that we're not talking about, and that's that the American people can make something a big deal when they feel that's important for the country and for national security. And I'll always be optimistic about that as a potential reality.
No, I hope so. I hope you're right. But again, I guess I grew up in an era where this stuff happened fairly often, and there was faith that we're dealing with it. We know they're there. The fact that there are people, running around saying, Biden didn't know it was going anywhere until I saw it with my. I said from the beginning, we probably knew as they were making it what they were going to do with it. And we see the reports now that they saw it launch, they were following from launch all the way across and actually gathering data off of it. We can't even have that conversation without people with their hair on fire.
The other thing, going back to your initial point, which does not resolve the current issue of where the action is, but I think gives some hope in the future, is that the other clear lesson from the Republican pressure on the Biden administration with respect to the balloon is that every political incentive in Washington right now is to take a harder line stance on China.
And that's a good thing.
As you said, like, there's a risk that that's just a narrative thing and no one's actually checking politicians' rhetoric against their realities. But if that checking can happen and if politicians can actually be held accountable, which goes back to the power of the American population, can be held accountable for converting narrative to action, that's where there's real potential, because clearly this is where every driving force is going.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Emily De La Brea. She's a co-founder of Horizon Advisory, horizonadvisory.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. So to that point, enough talking about the balloon at this moment. Strategically, if we do move on policy, what can we do to hold China more accountable? What are you advocating we should be doing? Because look, you talk to the average person on the street. We want manufacturing done in this country, and I think Biden is doing as best he can to reshore some of that. We want to make rebuild our infrastructure and have it made in America. We want to do those things. How do we, without starting a hot war, how do we navigate this new, what I gotta assume is the next Cold War? How do we navigate this that doesn't put us in a destructive position for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, there are more tactical things, but things that really matter, both on the defense and on the more proactive offense, or investing in a competitive America. You mentioned TikTok and China's pervasive use of, quote, ostensibly commercial entities to increase its leverage, increase its collection of data, and try to shape our behaviors. We should be taking real action on those companies. As we invest in domestic manufacturing, we should be doing so in a way that actually protects against Chinese leverage over our manufacturing. So let's not build electric vehicle battery plants that depend on Chinese technology, or that are joint ventures with Chinese entities and support those with government money. Let's, if we're going to partner with trusted economies and also try to build domestic champions. Throughout, if we've identified critical value chains that matter, let's invest all the way up the value chain. So we're not just developing American technology that requires critical materials from China, but actually developing whole trusted supply chains.
Can we do that? I mean, I've been told that the 4 years of the previous administration and our basically leaving the international stage, China filled that void and basically gobbled up most of the natural resources we need in the battery production arena, and that we're kind of dependent on them in a certain way. Or is that not correct?
So China has actively for decades been investing in international sources and domestic processing for what they see as the critical inputs into batteries and other emerging industries. That doesn't mean that there's not a chance to compete with them, including through domestic resources. In many cases, these aren't necessarily scarce materials. They're just materials that we haven't invested in mining or processing of, and that require productive capability. Also partnering with allies and partners who do have reserves. Canada is a great example. of a country that has enormous natural resources. And we should be working with Canada in terms of developing more secure supply chains, as well as with other partners. And generally, like, we are putting an extraordinary amount of money into strategic supply chains. All of that effort should start at the beginning of the supply chains, because if not, I mean, actually, as Chinese sources say, we're building on an adversarial foundation. There's also just across the board, like, bigger picture strategic actions I think we should be taking. So, for example, I would argue that we should be calling into question China's permanent normal trade relations status. They've aggressively defied every commitment that was made when we gave them PNTR. Why are we not talking about revoking that status now? And that's the kind of, like, big picture system level action that could impose real costs on China.
So let me ask you this, because I've advocated this for years. This is not new in my arena. We should have never given them this. It should have been temporary if we did, with sunsets and goals and all kinds of things that just never happened. Are we not so tied into them that at this point you would cause catastrophe? Inflation would go through the roof, and this would become a political football that, Chinese money that is so pervasive in our country and our economy would just whoever touched it would be destroyed.
I mean, I think there are two sides to that question. The first is, like, the process of how this happens, right? There have to be clear signals sent to the private sector probably first, but it's not an overnight situation. So there can be investments made. It's not absolutely devastating. And just because of inertia in the process, that probably would happen. For example, we might switch to a yearly debate in Congress as to whether to give China PNTR status for that year, or whatever the phrase is. And then ultimately that would make it more possible or incentivize the private sector to find alternatives. But the other part is, generally, like, no matter what, competing with China the way we have to compete from China and disentangling ourselves from China the way we have to, it's gonna hurt, right? That's gonna come at a cost. Inflation will go up. We will feel it. But that's a short-term cost versus long-term losing out entirely on American prosperity, security, and the international system.
And this is where you and I will absolutely agree. I think where we differ is that, I think this balloon, again, back to the damn balloon, was a trial balloon to see how we would react, to see how we would, across party lines, eat each other. And I think we failed that test. I think if you saw that kind of inflation from reshoring more faster, I think you would see the same kind of dynamics. Or do you disagree? Do you think there is a way that we could make a campaign? Is there a way the parties would come together and say, no, this is what we're doing, and we feel your pain kind of moment? Do you have those kind of high aspirations and hopes?
I mean, I really want that to be possible because I don't see an alternative. And I also, like, there is a part of me that remains convinced, and again, it's an optimistic part, but remains convinced that as it becomes fully internalized that we do have an outside authoritarian adversarial force that's threatening our country, how can the two parties in America not work together on that front? How can that not bring us together? And maybe I'm totally out to lunch and this is rose-colored glasses, but because that is such a necessity for any progress moving forward, I'm going to continue to maintain that it's possible.
So in looking at what Biden's doing thus far, and look, I think it's I've been saying that the thing that I like about the policies that they're moving on, and they're not doing it fast enough, and there are things that I don't like, but the fact that we're moving away from 40, 50 years of neoliberalism and starting to talk about reshoring manufacturing and starting talking about an economy that works for working people in the ways that my grandparents' generation built, to me, that there's hope in that. But sadly, again, these are all attack points from folks who it's just trolling to say, hey, Biden's doing horrible stuff. When the reality is, I think long term, we're going to look back and see this as a transformational period.
And you can even just look at the narrative of the past few years and see how transformational it has been. I mean, what you just said, those are now talking points for both parties. Were those at anywhere in the drinking water 5 years ago?
Nope.
And I'll add that, like, on what, again, might be my foolish optimism, I do think there's hope in looking at the track record of the select few legislators in Congress who work in a bipartisan way. And that track record is most obvious and most successful when it comes to legislation and positioning relevant to China and to American industrial capacity. And it's a select few, it's not a lot, but that is a real sign, I think, of potential for working across the aisle towards like the most important economic and security action we can be taking.
Last question I've got for you. Obviously, the balloon has gotten us to make aggressive moves. In fact, we've shot down a couple more balloons. I'm waiting for what else we're going to shoot down. Do you see China ramping this up, or do you think they got what they wanted?
That's a great question. And there's so much uncertainty because there's still so much uncertainty in this program. I think China was taken aback when we shot down the balloon. And I think that was not something Beijing was counting on, and that really did put them on the defensive in a way that had not been factored into any calculus. Now, as we devolve into reflexive infighting and resorting to tools that don't work, I think Beijing, is probably getting back into its more comfortable trend. But again, we're 10 days in, and this is still the big story, and the American population is still pushing for something. And one of the interesting things about China is you can tell when there's uncertainty about what precisely that question, whether they're ramping up or ramping down, because they don't really solidify around a narrative. And that's the case. So that's a long way of saying, I think China's figuring that out right now.
Yeah, nobody knows. Yeah, we'll see if they shoot one of our balloons down. Not allowed to say that. But we'll see. But Emily, I appreciate the time. As always, good stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much. Remember, check out Emily's website, horizonadvisory.org. We'll get links out on social media. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. That was the day the Red Scare took its toll on the U.S. labor movement. The Congress of Industrial Organizations expelled the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers for their alleged communist ties. Although small in numbers, communist organizers had played an important role in building the large industrial unions that were the core of the CIO. During the CIO's 1949 convention, this anti-communist hysteria was on full display. There, the CIO delegates decided to bar any individual with communist affiliations from serving as union officers. Their panic did not stop there, as the CIO leadership also voted to revoke the charters of unions they deemed too closely aligned with the communists. Immediately, the convention threw out the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers. During the 1950s, more unions were caught up in the purge, including the International Union of Longshoremen and Warehousemen. In all, the anti-communist frenzy saw 11 unions ousted from the House of Labor. According to a report to Congress by the Department of Labor, the cause of these expulsions was that the union's, quote, espousal of Soviet Russia became increasingly distasteful to the CIO leadership and rank-and-file membership. Cold War fear-mongering had effectively isolated the most left-leaning unions in the country. The impact on the labor movement was long-lasting. After the purge, unions took a much more moderate stance on things like civil rights. This hampered their organizing efforts in the South. To this day, there is less union representation in southern states. It also pushed the CIO closer to the Democratic Party and paved the way for the CIO's reunification with the more politically moderate American Federation of Labor.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So as I said, I'm I'm optimistic about what the Biden administration is doing and moving us in a direction that's going to reshore some manufacturing and take this on. This should be something that brings us together. Everybody I talk to, everybody says we've got to claw back what we've given off to China. We've got to rebuild our manufacturing facilities. In fact, when we took the tour over October and into November before the election, and we went into places that have lost massive amounts of jobs and manufacturing capacity, they all said the same thing. We want someone who's going to fight for us. We want somebody who's going to fight for industry and keep jobs here, instead of allowing corporate America to seek out the cheapest, most exploitable labor wherever they can find it, China. We want those jobs here. Now, Emily's right. The transition is going to be painful. It was all sunshines and rainbows when these corporations were leaving and holding workers, hostage and screwing them over. But this is one of those moments where I'm optimistic of what the administration's doing, but I still fear we've got the quote unquote opposition party who all they want to do is be opposition. There's no plan. There's no thoughts. There's no way of, hey, how are we going to actually do this? That's my problem. Let's quick get a phone call in. Alice on one. How are we doing, Alice?
We're doing okay. I survived the containment camp. But I wanted to tell you that I was talking to one of the local Trump supporters, and their daughter-in-law and son live like 10 minutes away on the Pennsylvania side of where the train wreck was in Ohio. And they were saying that some of the fumes and stuff were drifting over there. And she was just going on and on about she didn't know why Biden and who, what, and whatnot didn't do something about it. And I was so proud of myself. I bit my tongue. And I just said, I don't know what's going on. Because, trying to reason with them and saying, well, actually, let's trace this back. Wasn't going to do any good, but
tracing this back doesn't.
Some of them are sitting up and noticing it.
No, but here's the thing: tracing this back doesn't just stop with Trump. This goes back, decades and decades of deregulation and of this ideology of the companies will police themselves and do the right thing. This is decades in the making, and these kind of catastrophes happen. Maybe not in this kind of spectacular fashion, but this kind of stuff happens every day, and workers and communities get screwed over and end up holding the bag in this. And for me, I want this to be the learning lesson out of this catastrophe, that this doesn't have to happen all the time.
Oh, I know. I agree with you. That it's been going on for a good 45 years when they started cutting the regulations. But I just thought to myself, there's no use saying, well, let's go back a few decades and check out some of the
that's a narrative you didn't want to get into. I got you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Alice. No, and she's not wrong. Look, this is a long explanation. There's no bumper sticker here. There's no, blame Biden. Biden did that. There's none of that here. This is a long explanation. This is business friendly run amok. This is, corporations taking advantage of a political system that's starved for cash. Because we've decided that corporations are people and they have the right to pollute, evidently. So am I surprised? No. And look, I don't blame Alice for not having a conversation around this, because it's hard to explain. It's hard to go all through, decades and decades of this stuff. The fact that there were 40 railroad companies back in the 80s, we're down to 6. It's incredible. The fact that they had tens of thousands of more employees performing safety checks and doing the work, whereas now we've got more trains than ever and fewer employees. That's hard to explain. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
We basically nuked a town with chemicals so we could get a railroad open.
Ohio residents sue over fiery chemical train derailment after governor's decision to release toxic chemicals. Exxon drops its algae biofuel charade. Plus,
are you excited about buying an electric vehicle but worried that it could leave you unsatisfied?
Electric vehicles dominate Super Bowl car ads, signaling a potential culture shift.
Emphasis on potential. All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Netflix is joining in by including more EVs in their movies and shows. It's the least they can do.
It's the very least they can do. We'll take what we can get. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, what's going on in Ohio is not getting nearly enough coverage from the national news. Essentially, they have poisoned thousands of people, it seems to me.
Yes, it does. Cleanup is underway in East Palestine, Ohio, after last week's massive toxic chemical train derailment and fire, and officials' decision to burn off the train's flammable cargo in a controlled release operation to avert the risk of an even larger explosion.
Controlled release of toxic chemicals.
Residents have been allowed to return to their homes, but at least 4 class action lawsuits have been filed, seeking damages, and to force the railroad company, Norfolk Southern, to provide free health care monitoring amid reports of dead farm animals, birds, and fish in downstream areas and concerns about long-term exposure. The fiery derailment has renewed calls to upgrade railroad safety in the wake of staffing cuts implemented by the railroad industry and the Trump administration's rollback of Obama-era regulations tightening safety standards for trains carrying highly explosive liquids. On Monday, the Environmental Protection Agency identified 3 additional highly toxic chemicals released by the derailment and confirmed that some of the chemicals have been detected in the air and surface waters of the Ohio River Basin, but below thresholds that would trigger public health concerns.
The people who live there seem to be very concerned, and yet Governor Mike DeWine told everyone to just go on back. Everything was fine. Everything was safe. It seems that it was anything but.
In other news, last week, oil giant Shell posted all-time record profits of $42 billion in 2022.
Hey.
This week, environmental law firm Client Earth filed a climate lawsuit with England's highest court against all 11 individual members of Shell's board of directors.
Aww.
The first of its kind suit accuses the individuals of failing to manage the company's climate risks and, quote, breaching company law by failing to implement an energy transition strategy that aligns with the landmark 2015 Paris Agreement.
Company law? Do companies have laws?
Apparently they do.
Well, and I guess they're willing to violate those as well.
Oil giant Exxon also reported record-shattering profits.
Yay!
$59 billion in 2022 alone. And then Exxon quietly announced it is ending its much-touted research into developing sustainable algae-based biofuels.
Aww.
Exxon has spent millions since 2009 boasting about its algae research in ads and investor presentations, which critics throughout have condemned as greenwashing. Accurately, it turns out. Environmental activist Bill McKibben asks, why didn't Exxon invest those millions in solar and wind energy? Because, he quipped, energy from the sun and wind are free forever, and that doesn't fit Exxon's business model.
Sounds about right. By the way, didn't we have a story just last week with BP doing the same thing, record profits, and then backing off of their climate targets?
Yes. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres cited the oil industry's record profits last year in calling for governments to end billions in fossil fuel subsidies doled out every year to the fossil fuel industry.
Despite all of their war profiteering?
Yes.
Go figure.
In his State of the World address, Guterres warned that on our current trajectory, we are headed toward a catastrophic 2.8 degrees Celsius temperature rise above pre-industrial levels. Guterres castigated the powerful oil industry for blocking the shift to clean energy.
If you cannot set a credible course for net zero, you should not be in business.
Yeah, they shouldn't be in business.
Finally, commercials during the 57th Super Bowl game appear to mark a cultural shift. There were only 4 automobile ads in total, and 3 of them were for electric cars, including one that made fun of range anxiety or the fear of running out of a battery charge. But streaming service Netflix went a different route with an ad from comedian Will Ferrell announcing an initiative to increase the visibility of electric vehicles by featuring EVs in film and television. And it appears to be working. Online retailer Cars.com reports it saw a 21% increase in EV searches during and after the game.
Very cool. Maybe I was too cynical. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So again, I go back to this derailment, and the sad reality is it didn't catch media attention until somebody thought they could use it as a political issue to harm the other side. And look, there are a lot of questions. As I said at the start, this is corporate greed. This is a government that isn't on the ball. These are unions that have been hamstrung by decades of attacks. These are small towns that are getting screwed over. This is like the last throes of capitalism. This is stuff you would think you'd have heard back in the 80s and 90s, and not the 1980s and 90s. But that's why I've asked Greg Regan to come talk with us. Greg is the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Happy to be here.
So I'm looking at this, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of blame to go around. I'm not fond of the response out of the administration. I'm not fond of the fact that we over the summer heard all kinds of reports of safety concerns on the rails, workers that wanted to strike that the administration stopped. There's so much here, so much to blame. What should we be focused on right now?
I think we should be focused on the fact that we got lucky here. I think that's as bluntly as I can put it. The fact that we have derailments at an alarming rate around this country. We have a degrading safety culture in the railroad industry. And, we just end up in a situation where the wrong rail car is derailed at the wrong place and the wrong time. And we somehow end up with 0 casualties and 0 serious injuries. That's lucky. So what we do next with this, how we actually take this close call and take meaningful reform steps, that's the important part. That's the important part from my perspective.
Yeah, I saw a statistic said, I guess 2022, there were 1,022 derailments. I don't think I heard of any of those.
No, and look, there were 2 just in the week since this derailment occurred. And in one of them, there was a fatality down in Houston, and it also involved hazardous materials. But the driver of a truck who caused a derailment of a freight train outside of Houston, he unfortunately passed away. This stuff is not rare for the men and women who operate our train system. In many cases, it's sort of the luck of the draw about how severe it's going to be.
No, and that's the scary part of this. And you brought up hazmat. The sad reality is the statistic I saw is over a 5-year period. I think it was 14 through 18. The amount of hazardous material violations went up like 36%. I'm just trying to remember the statistic, but it's off the charts. And you go, why is that happening? How is that allowed to happen? And is it because maybe we've gotten rid of so many people who maybe it was their job to ensure that that those things were in compliance? I don't know. I'm curious.
Well, I can tell you certainly from the workers' perspective about what the members that I talk to on the ground, what they say is they have seen, when you lay off a 30-year workforce over the course of 7 years, that has a tangible effect on safety culture. It has a tangible effect on what is expected of workers, on the speed they're expected to turn things around in. And it is, whether it's a derailment that has no tangible impact, where maybe it's just a delay, or you have something like this where you have to evacuate an entire town, we should be treating all of those the same, because again, there is a luck of the draw aspect about what cars derail make a major difference in terms of what the actual consequences are. And I want to say sort of more broadly, freight rail still is the safest way to move most of these hazardous materials across the country. We have to move them. We have to deliver them from where they're produced to where we're going to use them for manufacturing, other purposes. Freight rail remains the safest way to do it. And the men and women who are doing that work are highly trained and highly effective at it. This is an outlier of a situation, but it doesn't mean we should ever stop in our ability to try to make this situation safer. So when we talk about risks and possible problems in freight rail and possible safety risks, it's because we want the best, most effective and growing freight rail system we possibly can have.
No, we need it. I mean, we desperately need to have the ability to move products across this country, and rail, as you pointed out, is the safest, also probably the cheapest way of doing it, the most environmentally sound, if you will, as well. Mm-hmm. But the sad reality is, in talking with my friend Jared Cassidy from the SMART Union, we have seen massive reductions in the number of employees, especially as trains have gotten larger. One Government Accountability Office report says that trains have grown 25% from just a decade ago. The fact that trains are getting bigger, fewer people are doing it, and you've got this precision scheduled railroading that really has thrown a bunch of monkey wrenches into this. And the fact that, as Jared pointed out, inspection times have been cut in half to where now you got 90 seconds to do a 120-point inspection. I don't know how you do that.
No, and that is a major problem. I mean, we cannot continue in the direction we're going right now. And I don't think it's a coincidence. And of course, we can't prove causation with this, but the correlation of when we've seen the reductions in workforce levels and when we've seen the rates of accidents and incidents, both on the railroads and in the rail yards, have increased dramatically, 10% increase, when you would think that as we start to get better technology, better information, better training, that we should be decreasing the rates of incidents and accidents. But that's actually been the opposite direction. And this is me speaking, but I cannot imagine that drastic reductions in workforce and the strain that you're putting on that workforce don't have a major cause to play in all of this.
No, I mean, I agree. And here's the thing. I go back to the number of people on a train. When I was a kid, there were a bunch of people on the train. There were several people on the caboose. There were people in the middle. There were people on the train. Now we've got two people on a train that, 5 miles long? How is that? I know we've got detectors along the way and all of that, but it's been reported that this train was on fire for 20 miles. I got to imagine if you had people on that train, they'd have smelled, seen, felt something. Maybe you just got it stopped soon. Who knows? I'm just saying that having more eyes and ears is not a worse thing.
No, it's definitely not. And I would also want to point out, while the broader industry had a 30% reduction in their workforce, 45,000 people over the past 8 years. Union Pacific was one of the worst offenders. They had a 40% reduction of their workforce during that time. So they've been most aggressive in terms of their furloughing and reduction of the workforce. And, while we can never point to, until we find out what happened with with this particular derailment, until the the Transportation Safety Board comes out with their findings, I can't comment on what caused it, what would have prevented it, right, all that stuff. But I can tell you about what people are saying about the broader safety culture and the problems we're seeing on the ground that contribute to a number of incidents across the country. Again, and you can point to the next two that happened this week afterwards.
Yeah, well, what they said in their report today is that what they came out with, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, that it was a wheel bearing in the final stages of overheat failure. And the only reason they caught that is because there was a residential surveillance camera that picked it up, moments before it derailed. This we know. So we know what I suspected all along. We now know that to be the case. Whether an inspection would have saved that, whether having more time than 90 seconds to look over a car, would have helped, I don't know. But I can't imagine it would have not been I can't imagine it wouldn't have not been helpful.
No, you're right. And the other thing that I've pointed to that we've called for since this accident happened is, there is a program at the Federal Railroad Administration, the Confidential Close Call Reporting System. This is modeled after similar systems in the aviation community where pilots, and in this case, railroad workers, can say, oh man, that was close. We almost had a real problem there. It was on this turn of this track, and so we should have a flag for that, or they can flag when they felt some deterioration in one of the systems of the cars. Basically, they can feel free to report this stuff without any fear of reprisal from their employer. That works great in the aviation system. What we learned is that in the railroad system, you need your employers to voluntarily participate in that program. Without the employer's participation, you lose that protection as an employee to report these problems without fear of reprisal. So we have this all set up. Amtrak participates, commuter rail systems participate. None of the Class 1 freight railroads participate. So while I can't point to the fact that this could have prevented something, but I think there's a real missed opportunity when we're not collecting that data, when we're not getting that worker input into where the problem areas are in our freight rail system. So I hope that we're looking at this near miss. And again, while there may be long-term consequences, this was a near miss when it came to actual deaths, that we are going to take a very hard look at how do we make this system safer.
Yeah, I hope so. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show with Greg Regan, president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. TTD.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Now, everyone's focused on the fact that they blew up portions of this train. And I've had people say that they blew it up so that they could open the train lines faster, a whole bunch of nefarious reasons. Is there a reason that they blew this up?
Yeah, from what I've been told, it was a controlled release to burn it out to prevent I think it's a Blevy explosion is the technical, it's an acronym where you can have a really massive explosion if you don't actually try to control the pressure inside one of these tanks. And that was the decision that was made. From the conversations I had, I'm not sure if that was, no one's making a commentary on whether that was the right decision, the wrong decision, but it was done based on the risk assessment on the ground, that there were other cars at risk, which could have had a chain reaction of explosions. There were a number of things that could have happened, but they didn't put explosives to the train car, which was another option. It's my understanding.
Yeah, because you see that giant, that big plume of smoke. You wonder, was this the right thing to do, the wrong thing, especially as it's going to be spread over miles and affecting people. I also wanted to ask you about our infrastructure, because you talked about, around certain track areas, when you look at the fact that, we've got aging infrastructure, how much of these derailments, maybe not this one in particular, or maybe, because again, we don't know, what condition are our freight rails in? And is this something that, because I'm told repeatedly that the industry upkeeps their rails, and it's supposed to be one of the best in the globe. I'm curious thoughts.
Look, I think our freight rail system, it needs a lot of investment in general. I think we need modern rail cars. I think we need to make more investment into capacity, certainly, and to modernizing. The federal infrastructure law that is putting a lot of money into our supply chain system is going to make a number of investments that are not going to be, checks cut to the railroads, but it's going to be checks cut to municipalities and states that are where the investment is going to directly benefit the railroads. So we're talking about grade crossing improvements. We're talking about expanding access to ports. We're talking about intermodal facilities. All of these things are not checks that are going to be cut to Union Pacific or Norfolk Southern or any of those companies, but they're going to be the beneficiaries of a possible expanded marketplace. So I hope that they are going to be willing to match that type of investment in their own infrastructure to meet the needs and to make the system safer. While they will very much tout their own expenditure, their own investment in their systems, and they'll give you big raw numbers, but as a percentage of revenue and as a percentage of operation, that continues to drop. So that's where I have a real problem with their, assessment of their own investment, their own, largesse into their own system.
Yeah, because, I look at this from the outside, and again, we've moved to this system that corporations get to police themselves. And I look at this of, just massive corporate greed that we've seen over the last several decades. I look at Norfolk Southern, extremely profitable, $4.8 billion profit in 2022. The stock buybacks and all of the stuff that go into this, where you go, this is stuff that could have gone into upgrading your equipment. This is stuff that could have gone to hiring more workers. I look back over the summer. It's not that these railroads couldn't give their workers 15 paid sick days. It's not that they couldn't answer answer a lot of the safety questions and alleviate those things. It's because they didn't want to and they didn't have to. And sadly, we had an administration that didn't have their back and the workers' back in that moment. So for me, the problem is multifaceted and across the board.
Well, I would disagree that the administration didn't have the workers back in this moment, because let's be perfectly clear, if we hadn't had the action from this administration last summer, we would still be at the bargaining table and all these workers would not have had a single raise. And while I agree with you that there was not enough done in that Presidential Emergency Board report, which again, those are independent arbitrators, they're not at the control of the president, that broke the dam in terms of actually getting to an agreement that 8 of the 12 unions ratified, by the way. And while I think there were a lot of things left on the cutting room floor that shouldn't have been, including sick days, I think that the end result was a massive step in the right direction for a number of areas. And when I point to issues that I think are plaguing the industry right now, staffing is the number one problem. The fact that they furloughed this many people is the number one problem. That is the reason why sick days became an issue. That's the reason why the attendance policies are so draconian, because they need people to work all the time because they don't have anybody else to take those shifts. Those are all problems that are a direct result of the business practices that were furloughing so many of the workforce. And unfortunately, while I would love to have a collective bargaining agreement that solves all these problems, it only covers the people that are employed. And they don't have enough people employed. And that's the underlying issue. And so until they start addressing things like sick leave, and we saw some progress on that last week, and hopefully that will continue, and still we started addressing the attendance policies and start getting some sort of morale correction and some sort of work-life balance correction on the railroads, then we're not going to be able to build the workforce where we can actually have, to recruit and retain people that are needed to do this in the best possible way.
No, I'm with you. And look, I gave the administration credit for doing the things that you pointed out, but ultimately I thought they could have messaged this better. I knew there was never going to be a strike. That was never going to be allowed to happen. But I think the messaging could have gotten better.
That's fair. That is fair. One thing I do also want to point out, when we're talking about sort of the response to this particular incident, far too often in transportation, where, I represent so many workers, the major safety reforms that are made are done because something really awful happened. Think about the Colgan air crash in aviation in 2009. That was the 4th accident in a matter of only 6 or 7 years. We had a number of people pass away in commercial aviation where planes falling out of the skies. And it spurred some major reforms in terms of pilot training, fatigue rules, and other issues that made it so that we would improve the safety of the system. And guess what? It worked. I mean, despite the fact that some people right now are trying to pare back some of those training requirements, but we haven't had a domestic U.S. aircraft fall out of the sky since then. It's the safest period in the history of U.S. aviation after those reforms were made. We were given a gift with this one because we had a major high-profile problem that fortunately didn't kill people. So let's seize that opportunity and for once not have a regulation or new safety regulations be written in blood. This is our opportunity right now. That would be my message to every member of Congress, everybody in the regulatory facilities. And frankly, that's what our unions are going to be carrying forward right now.
That is an excellent point. And again, all we hear from my friends on the right is job-killing regulation. And I always ask, what about the people-killing lack of regulation? This is one of those moments. But Greg, I appreciate the time. As always, I hope you'll come back as this continues and keep us up to date.
You got it. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks so much, Greg Regan, president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. TTD.org, the website. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments. and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interesting little bit. Bernie Sanders, chair of the Help Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pension. Evidently, says that Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, has refused to testify in front of his panel and answer the question, why he's doing all the things he's doing, why over 75 unfair labor practices have been filed with the National Labor Relations Board for him violating federal labor law. Now, the weird thing is, again, I go back to, and this is one of those moments. Had Hillary Clinton become president, he probably would have been the labor secretary. And again, this is another one of those moments where, look, I want Democrats to stand up and fight for working people. This was an opportunity for the Biden administration and for Pete Buttigieg. So there's some stuff here to really take a lead. And I know my friends are going to be really angry. It's the state's responsibility. It's Governor DeWine in Ohio. It's Governor Shapiro here in Pennsylvania. Shapiro was out in front of this. DeWine evidently said, no, go on back. Everything's fine. Again, kind of and this is one of those really interesting moments. And, because I've got people who ask me, how could you possibly support those Republicans? And the reality, or those Democrats, the reality is the Republican Party is not the friend of workers. And it comes to these kind of things. DeWine wasn't raising the bells and pushing and expanding the area of containment. He's not going to be the guy who's going to hold these big corporations to the fire. He's not, because it's not what they do. Their ideology, their core belief, and this comes back down to that belief structure, that corporations are always going to do what's in the best interest of the corporation. And they believe that, killing people is not in their best interest. The rail barons have never cared about people, have never cared about communities that they run through. Never. So am I surprised by any of this? No, I wouldn't be surprised by it. But the core answer is, I want a Democratic Party, and this is where Democrats kind of fell behind on this. Should have been demanding more. We should have seen a much more aggressive FEMA, coming in, and this is a catastrophe. There should have been some reaction. I know. People have said, but it's the states. States. I get that. I get it's DeWine. I get that the responsibility lies in the state, and the states, generally have to ask the federal government to step in. I get that. But if you're the Democratic Party and this is going to come up and bite you in the behind, don't you take a really aggressive, strong pro-worker position? They are now, but this should have been happening in the initial days right after. And this comes back down to what I've always said. I want someone who's going to stand up and fight for me and not just offer to hold my coat in a street fight. I know hate mail's coming, and you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, to send that hate mail. I do answer all emails personally. This is one of those moments, folks. Again, want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Right back after this. Stick around. I'm I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. That was the day the Red Scare took its toll on the U.S. labor movement. The Congress of Industrial Organizations expelled the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers for their alleged communist ties. Although small in numbers, communist organizers had played an important role in building the large industrial unions that were the core of the CIO. During the CIO's 1949 convention, this anti-communist hysteria was on full display. There, the CIO delegates decided to bar any individual with communist affiliations from serving as union officers. Their panic did not stop there, as the CIO leadership also voted to revoke the charters of unions they deemed too closely aligned with the communists. Immediately, the convention threw out the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers. During the 1950s, more unions were caught up in the purge, including the International Union of Longshoremen and Warehousemen. In all, the anti-communist frenzy saw 11 unions ousted from the House of Labor. According to a report to Congress by the Department of Labor, the cause of these expulsions was that the unions, quote, espousal of Soviet Russia became increasingly distasteful to the CIO leadership and rank-and-file membership. Cold War fear-mongering had effectively isolated the most left-leaning unions in the country. The impact on the labor movement was long-lasting. After the purge, unions took a much more moderate stance on things like civil rights. This hampered their organizing efforts in the South. To this day, there is less union representation in southern states. It also pushed the CIO closer to the Democratic Party and paved the way for the CIO's reunification with the more politically moderate American Federation of Labor.
Please Be My Valentine. That is not only a warm, sweet, sometimes romantic sentiment people express in mid-February on frilly red cards. It's also the name of a 3rd century saint who literally lost his head, a 9th century pope whose reign lasted only 40 days, 3 Roman emperors, a very good Mexican hot sauce, and a tiny town in Texas. That town has a genuinely sweet story to tell and a unique role to play in the sending of thousands of Valentine's Day sentiments to people around the world. Valentine, Texas, population 217, was founded by the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s and reportedly was named for one of the corporation's big shareholders. Nothing romantic about that. But in recent years, would-be Cupids have turned the town's name and, believe it or not, its one-room post office into a center of affectionate expression. What happened is that romantics from distant places began to batch up their pre-addressed stamped valentines and zip them to this postal outpost way out on the Texas-Mexico border. Why? Because to give their sentimental missives extra oomph, they wanted them to bear the special touch of being mailed from an actual place named Valentine. The greatest thing about our public postal workers is that they literally deliver, and the Valentine branch goes the extra mile to provide this loving gesture at no extra charge. Ismelda Ornelas, postmaster of the 79854 office, hand stamps each envelope herself. Indeed, the Valentine Post Office is now officially designated the Love Station. Moreover, the local school district holds an annual art contest among students to design each year's Valentine postmark, which is then stamped on each envelope. This is Jim Hightower saying, see, while the media tells us our world is going to hell, here's another grassroots example of loving, creative people going the other way. Happy Valentine's Day. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday in Washington, D.C., the American Federation of Government Employees held a rally talking about pay, talking about their pay, their working conditions. Had some legislators come out and join them, hundreds of workers coming out and saying, look, you made us heroes, called us frontline heroes, called us essential. We got through the pandemic. Every time there's a crisis, you hold us hostage. It's time that you treat us with the dignity and respect that our labor, that our herodom demands. That's why they're asking for a pay increase and asking for Congress to do their job and help them out. That's why I've asked Everett Kelly to come talk with us. Dr. Kelly is the national president for the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE. AFGE.org is their website. Dr. Kelly, thanks for taking time for us.
The pleasure's mine, Rick. It's always good to be with you.
So walk me through. You had this big rally on Tuesday. Pay increase. What are you guys demanding?
Well, we're seeking at least a 8.7% pay increase for this next fiscal year. And we think that it is high time, to restore the purchasing power of federal wages and salaries and market comparable to federal pay. When, the law that created locality pay for salaried federal workers was passed 32 years ago, the Federal Pay Compatibility Act, or the FEPCA, right? The pay gap was about 25%. And today, it's still over 23% on average. And AFGE, we support the FAIR Act, right? The bill that's introduced by Representative Gary Connolly, and Senator Brian Schatz, HR 536 and Senate Bill 124, that provides a federal pay raise of 8.7% for 2024 as a means of both restoring federal employee living standards and making progress on closing part of that pay gap.
Right. Now, here's where I come down on this. We should be using our tax dollars to lift people's wages, conditions, lives up, and having something in place that wages aren't eaten away by inflation, a cost of living adjustment in people's wages should start at the federal level so that all workers eventually get this. Because I support it because, look, at the end of the day, if you're doing better, the private sector is going to have to do better. And this kind of race to the top, or at least race to the middle, seems logical and sensible to me, no?
Right, absolutely. Absolutely, Rick.
So when you're selling this to the average person, because I know my listeners are out there going, I didn't get an 8.7 raise. Why should they deserve it? They're just those lazy government workers that we've been hearing about. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I would say that, what you probably don't know is that the federal worker are 23% behind in the pay gap, right? When it comes to other employees in like positions, we're 23% behind. Secondly, I would explain to them, what we do for the American public. We're out working for the American public. We are the ones that make sure that the veterans, that go and serve in the military, get themselves hurt, come back, we are the ones that make sure that they are taken care of. We are the ones to make sure that, Social Security checks go out on time and that they are processed. We're the ones to make sure that our skies are safe. We're the ones to make sure that our borders are secure. Don't you think that we deserve a livable wage if we're taking care of the American people like that?
Yeah, more importantly, I don't think you deserve it. I think you earn it. I mean, that's
you've earned it.
This is where I don't think the American public gets what your members do. But again, there's this attack on anything public sector. There is a hard line that anything public sector is bad and that everything in private sector is right. And the reality is you guys do jobs that in the private sector they wouldn't do or wouldn't do well. So for me, we have to have a vibrant, strong public sector, and we've got to have the kind of wages that draw people to want to stay and do these kind of jobs and do public service. It's not all charity work.
Brother Rick, you said the magic word, or words, because you said a lot, there. We got to make sure that people want these jobs, right? I mean, that are able to do these jobs, right? Because these are jobs that, most people don't want to perform, but we have very patriotic employees, that love the work that they do, and they give themselves to make sure that the work is completed correctly, so that's a thing that makes me proud to represent the employees that I represent.
See, for me, Everett, this comes down to, I want a public sector that's not based on patronage, based on whoever's in the White House getting the best deal for their people. I want our public sector workers to be boring bureaucrats who come to work and do the best job that they could possibly do, being the best skilled, best trained, most knowledgeable workforce we can get, because you're the guys who oversee everything else. You're the guys who are regulating if our water is clean to drink, if our air is clean to breathe, if the planes aren't going to fall out of the sky, if, oh, by the way, we mandate inspections on rail cars so we don't have derailments, and if the water is going to be clean to drink after this. I don't want people depending on, hey, maybe I can go get a job on the other side because they pay better. I want to make sure that people we've got doing these jobs want to stay and make a career of serving the public and still being able to support their families.
But Rick, this is exactly true. Matter of fact, today, we held a rally at the EPA, right? At the central office, right? Because, those are environmentalists and scientists and, people like that do exactly what you just said. They make sure that our air quality is correct. They make sure that our water is clean, and they are out saying, look, we want to make sure that we have decent benefits and decent pay, because people can go right down the street and get a job in the private sector, making a whole lot more money than what we make. So do right by us, right? Do right by those federal employees that are very patriotic, that are very, concerned about their job and want to do that job, but they also want to make a livable wage so that they can take care of their families and make sure that, house note is taken care of and car note is taken care of and the electric bill is paid. All of these things that come with being, a family, they want to be able to do that, and they should be able to do that with as much ease as the next person.
Yeah, and be able to make a living and get the pride of knowing that they have a job that matters and one that still puts food on the table and a roof over their head. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Dr. Everett Kelly. He's the president of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE.org, if there is their website, if you want to check that out. Now, Dr. Kelly, I'm looking at the coming months, and sadly, over the last decades, we've seen your members basically being the proverbial dog in every fight, the one that gets kicked in every opportunity, whether it's being blamed for something happening or the next time we decide, we're going to willy-nilly shut the government down. I want to get your thoughts on the debt ceiling fight, because this is coming up and it's coming quickly, sadly. And your members are the ones who, every time this happens, are the ones who suffer and struggle through this. So I wanted to get some of your thoughts on where you see this going and what's going on.
But Rick, first of all, I must say this. Congress must raise the debt ceiling on the U.S. Treasury security without any strings attached, okay? Now that's very key. Now, some members of Congress has announced that they will not support an increase in the debt ceiling without reduction in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. The White House says it will not negotiate such an arrangement, and I'm glad to know that. AFG strongly support the administration's refusal to negotiate on these matters. Now Congress know we need new debt whenever they approve laws that cost money or affect tax revenue. Now, most of the lawmakers, threatening to, extort Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, have voted for bills that require the issuance of new debt, showing their hypocrisy, if you ask me, along with their irresponsibilities and indifferences to the consequences their action would have for Americans. Actually, default on debt payments and other obligations would have an enormous adverse effect on the world's economy.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically, come with me, if you will, for a second, because I have this thought that, and I've been, every time we have these debt ceiling fights, Republicans are always looking for their pound of flesh. I go back to Screw Quester during the Obama years, where we had to get a pound of flesh everywhere. I'm now looking at the people who are negotiating this moment. I really think in this hostage situation, they really do want to shoot the hostage. I mean, I never really believed that they wanted to in the past. I really think we're at a moment where there are people who are on the Republican side who do want to shoot the hostage in this situation, which means your members get screwed over, which means the American people get screwed over, and globally, who knows what happens when we set off this bomb? I just do you see the same kind of dynamics, or am I just being a little over the top?
You're not over the top at all, Rick. You know, as a matter of fact, I think it's very good. It's spot on, if you ask me, because, you know, a default would raise interest rate via, you know, downgrades of American credit ratings, you know, leading to the waste of trillions of dollars over decades and needless high borrowing costs, right? And I believe that paying some bills and not others is not an option for avoiding this crisis. You know, the Treasury can't prioritize payments. All authorized payments are on legal footing, equal legal footing. And without raising the ceiling, $1 trillion would need to be cut from approved agency budgets already. So you're spot on, and I appreciate you, you know, making that point. And I hope that others understand where we are when it comes to the debt ceiling.
Now, the last time we shut down the government, the last couple of times we did this, how painful was it for your members? You know, I remember talking to people who weren't, you know, there were a number of paydays that came and went with no payday, with no paychecks.
Absolutely.
How painful was this?
Oh, it was very painful. I mean, you know, people lost their homes and, you know, because sometimes, you know, we're federal workers. You know, we work from paycheck to paycheck. You know, you go 2 weeks without a paycheck, you know, I mean, you could easily lose homes, you could lose automobiles. I mean, people can't eat, you know, can't pay the child's tuition. You know, that means they drop out of school and all these types of things. I mean, it was very painful. It was painful for me to sit back and watch the 300,000 people that I represent, you know, have to go through that. Now, all 300,000 wasn't affected. We know that, but they was affected inadvertently because when they see one person hurting, guess what? All of us are hurting.
Yeah. Now, I made this point a moment ago that you and your members are basically the proverbial dog in a lot of these fights, the easy whipping boy, because you really don't have the ability to go and take on all of the attacks on the public sector, on government employees, on the government as a whole. But there's this thought out, you're just lazy, you don't want to work, which is why I point to this Show Up Act that the Republicans are trying to ram through or have passed in the House. I don't know that it goes anywhere in the Senate. We'll see. But, you know, this sends a message to me that's saying that, you know, you guys are, you're just lazy, just sitting at home, and kind of that same business mentality. We're not even really looking at metrics.
Well, you know, and it bothered me to even phantom, you know, the thought of someone calling the people that I represent, the union that I represent, lazy and just sitting at home and all that stuff, because I know the people that I represent. And federal employees have demonstrated great tendency and endurance in getting their work done despite all the challenges that they have faced during the last few years. You know, when you know, first of all, there was a hostile White House, right? And then there was a global pandemic. And these employees were the ones that kept America going. And to have someone to call them lazy, you know, it's beyond me. And it bothers me. It upsets me to even think that someone would call those federal employees that has kept this country running for the last few years lazy or incompetent. It really bothered me to the core because I know the people that I represent.
Well, let me ask you this, Dr. Kelly, because if you watch the speeches that they gave during the Show Up Act debate, it was all about the workers working from home don't do their jobs. They're just sitting on the couch. Basically, they're just eating bonbons and watching daytime TV. Do we know how efficient some of these programs of people working for home work is? Look, I've heard in corporate America, you know, people have never been more efficient than where they are now. I have a lot of problems with telework on a whole privacy level, but from a productivity standpoint, it sounds to me like pretty damn successful, and your members really rose to the occasion.
It has been successful, Rick, and that's the part that I am really glad about. You know, in certain departments, you know, in certain agencies, we had backlogs and all these things going into the pandemic. All those backlogs have been cleared up. You know, people are working, and they are, in my opinion, I'm wondering how they get all this work done in the amount of time that they have to work. But certainly productivity has gone up. Remote work, telework, it works. It works for America.
Now, are you all on board with this? I mean, obviously, I know in my world, the thought of privacy concerns keep popping up. How much control does the employer have over your home, base area? There's a bunch of that. Are you negotiating, talking about that? Or is this just, the Republicans are saying, you got to come back to the office. This is now done. It's over. Where do you see this going?
Well, what I'm glad about, Rick, is that, our union has recently negotiated updated contracts at agencies, including the EEO, the National Science Foundation, and the National Archives and Records Administration that expand the use of employees' remote work arrangement. And I see that we will continue to fight, for the opportunity to negotiate over this issue, because we've seen it work. I mean, we have the data to prove that it works. And, we will be out there continuing to make our case for remote work.
Good stuff. Last question I've got for you. I've had a number of AFGE members tell me they don't think President Biden's moving fast enough in replacing some of the Trump era heads of departments. Because look, the president, in my view, is the most pro-union president, at least of my lifetime. I like a lot of the things he's done. A couple of things, we can have arguments about. But in your experience, what are you seeing out of this administration for your members?
Well, I do agree that President Biden is probably the most pro-union president that we have seen in my lifetime, for sure. There is some areas that cause concern. There are times when we feel that the administration is not operating swiftly enough. But I really don't think that's the president, if you ask me. I think that the president's desire is genuine. I think that he genuinely wants to be a pro-labor employer. But I think that we have some managers that just don't want to give up that power. And so they are circumventing the system that he's put in place. Now, that's what I truly believe.
No, I think so too. And there's a part of me goes, just need to move a little faster and rooting out some of the anti-worker, anti-government folks that we saw during the Trump years. And hey, that's what re-election is for. Or at least that's my thought. But Dr. Kelly, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work, and I look forward to having you back again real soon.
Rick, thank you, sir. And I always know we're here for you because you've always been there for us.
Good stuff. Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Got to take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So yesterday in Washington, D.C., the American Federation of Government Employees held a... I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. We need to spend money on health care, schools, housing, not a war budget. This was the statement of Fred Pecker, a member of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local Number 6. On this day in labor history, the year was 2003. Fred, who was protesting in San Francisco, was just one of the estimated 10 million people in 800 cities across the globe that protested the U.S. war in Iraq that day. The Guinness Book of World Records declared the protests the largest in human history. The official U.S. labor response to the Iraq war, just as in wars before it, was mixed. Some unions supported the war, while others passed resolutions against it. Others stood silent, focusing on their contracts and domestic labor issues instead of taking a public stand on an international conflict. In New York City, 30 unions representing 500,000 workers publicly endorsed the February 15th protests. A month before the massive protests, anti-war unionists across the country formed the organization U.S. Labor Against the War. The coalition pushed for the AFL-CIO to take a stance against the war. Their efforts were successful 2 years later. In 2005, at their national convention in Chicago, the AFL-CIO passed a resolution calling for the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq. 3 years later, on May Day 2008, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union shut down the West Coast ports in protest of the war. What Fred, the longshoreman's comment on this day in 2003 revealed is that the lives of rank-and-file working people are impacted by war, wherever they or their union personally stand on the issue. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, Jamie Raskin, who I love this guy. Cancer and all, and the Stevie Van Zandt do-rag on his head. He is the ranking Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. He is requesting that while they're investigating children, while they're going after Hunter Biden, maybe you might want to look into the whole Jared Kushner thing. We've been talking about this for a very long time. The fact that, somehow he got $2 billion from a Saudi investment fund when the Saudi investment fund said, no, we shouldn't do this. There's could be, since we're doing this, since we're going after the children, difference being Hunter Biden was never part of any administration, as where Jared Kushner was the guy who solved all the world's problems. In fact, I got people telling me that the best treaty ever was the Israeli United Arab Emirates peace deal to bring peace to the Middle East. You know that peace deal without the Palestinians? Yeah, you figure that out. I can't. But if the claim is we're bringing transparency back and we're going to take, this is one of those things you have to do. Now Raskin sent a letter saying, hey, this is something we should be looking into. Do you think they will? I wouldn't put any money on it. And finally, remember that famous picture of the Tiki Torch folks at the Unite the Right rally that ended up, where the Heather Heyer was murdered? Do you remember that picture? They're screaming angry young white guys with their Tiki Torch and their collared shirts. One of the guys prominent in the photo, a guy named Duke Nukem, after the video game. Yes, he actually changed his name from Ted Landrum to Teddy Joseph Von Nukem. Evidently, at 35, he is now dead. Evidently went back down to the hay shed in his southern Missouri ranch or farm and blew his brains out. Now, there's no celebrating here. There's none of that. The fact is this is not a good guy. White supremacist, Nazi, and that's not even my problem with him. My problem with him is he was arrested back in March of 2021 for having more than 33 pounds of fentanyl pills. Now, we're pointing at those illegals because it's the illegals that coming across the desert, evidently climbing over the fences. They're the ones bringing in the fentanyl. When the reality is, it's white guys like this. 33 pounds of fentanyl. And my question is how do you get out of jail having 33 pounds of fentanyl? Now, I get it. No, everyone's got a right to bail. The guy in Philadelphia with 3 peppermint patties sat waiting for over 500 days. How does a guy with 33 pounds of fentanyl? Oh, wait a second. The guy with the peppermint patties was a black guy. This guy's a white guy with money and resources and an entire white nationalist, not neo-Nazi group behind him. I think we now know. But anyway, dead. His trial was about to begin. Probably didn't want to spend the rest of his life in jail. As a neo-Nazi and someone who's famed with the picture, probably the right call. Probably the right call. I'm sure he's somewhere. Anyway, if you miss any portion of the program, make sure you download the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. You've got a thought, question, comment, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.